What is up, folks? I'm Chris, your UFL writer, and we are here at the end of the line. I'm taking a look here at Saturday night's UFL Championship, the finals between the Michigan Panthers, winner of the USFL Conference, and the DC Defenders, the winner of the XFL Conference, here to wrap up yet another exciting spring football season. Thanks, as always, for following all of our spring football content. We really appreciate the effort that you all have put into grinding this league alongside with us, because they don't make it easy for us, that's for sure. Michigan is favored by 3.5 points here in the first 50-point total game of the season. So the total's at 50.5 points right now, and that's why you see Bryce Perkins on the screen here. The dual threat quarterback is almost certainly going to be your most popular player and your most popular captain option in Showdown this week. Thanks to James Larson of the Pro Football Newsroom, we do have access to the final UFL depth chart of the season. The big things to take note of here is that Ty Scott is returning for the Defenders. He's listed as a secondary wide receiver. He's listed as a backup to Braylon Sanders. Personally, I don't trust that. I think Ty Scott has been one of their best players, and I think he will get some really high-value opportunities here in a must-win championship game for the Defenders, so I'm keeping an eye on that. We have Matt Colburn as a surprise inactive as the backup running back for the Michigan Panthers. As far as skill players are concerned, Nate McCrary is returning as the RB2 behind Toa Taua here. So Colburn's inactive. Tight end 3, Jalen Weidermeyer is inactive for Michigan, as is usually the case when both Cole Hicatini and Gunnar Oaks are up. Darius Hagens, the third running back for the DC Defenders, he is inactive as he usually is week in and week out for them. Minor surprise, Ben Bresnahan, inactive at tight end for DC. So they'll be going with just Briley Moore and Mason Fairchild. Bresnahan this season has been the second tight end. He's been active and played ahead of Fairchild virtually all season. So that is a little bit of a minor shift at the bottom of the depth chart. Javon Antonio, another outside wide receiver for the Defenders, who's been kind of a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, inactive again this week as he was in the conference championship round in favor of Seth Williams, who had the big touchdown reception from Jordan Ta'amu last week early in the game against St. Louis. Okay, we have two teams, 7-4 here, matching up for the first modern spring football title that does not feature the Birmingham Stallions. And that is exciting for the brand of spring football, that we finally have a little bit of parity here in the UFL. How are we going to build successful lineups on DraftKings to try to take down the $10,000 prize here in the large field GPP? How are we going to build successful lineups for low-risk contests? For those of you that might be interested in that, I'm going to do my best Brian impression here and try to give you all of the information that you need to build successful showdown lineups for this game. Hopefully this serves as a little bit of a refresher on what we give during the NFL season and a little bit of a preview of what you should expect from Brian with our showdown videos in the 2025 season, which is inching ever closer here. And we have some exciting stuff about the NFL to share next week here with Occupy and with DraftKings. Michigan is the favorite side here, favored by 3.5 points. And our typical showdown formula, right, is to try to lock up all of the scoring. That means we want to have exposure to all of the passing and rushing touchdowns that we can get in a football game. With Michigan being favored, that means we probably want to take Bryce Perkins and make him our favored captain here. Toa Taua, the starting running back. On the DC side, we have Jordan Ta'amu at quarterback, and we have Deion Jackson, who has been the number 1 running back in recent weeks. Each of these running backs had huge games in the conference championships as well, so I do think they will be extremely popular plays. You see, we have just 3,400 per player remaining, and the typical move here is to look for a missed price value play and a special teams or a kicker unit, or a couple of those special teams units to try to round out our lineup, or mess around with the salary a little bit by dropping down from the quarterback captain to maybe the running back or one of those value plays to jam in the best plays. In the UFL, I don't think we really have as many options to get cute with the salary here in Showdown and low risk. I do think it makes sense to stick with the quarterbacks, most likely Bryce Perkins, as your captain option here. I could be sold on going to Ta'amu at captain, except he's priced higher than Bryce Perkins. So we have the favored side quarterback with more rushing ability, and he's a little cheaper at the quarterback position. So I think Perkins is just your optimal quarterback for low risk contests here. What can we do with 3,400 per player remaining? Looking at what is at the bottom of the salary table. Don't trust the DraftKings designations here, guys, because we know that Weidermeyer's out, so he's not an option. Fairchild, not really going to see any opportunities. Xavier Malone has had virtually no stats all season long. We've had 2 targets, and it came in a game where Michigan was playing backups exclusively in Week 10 at the end of the season. He's not really an option. Darius Higgins is out this week. Gunnar Oaks is listed as the starting tight end for the Panthers. He did have 4 targets in Week 10. Didn't really do much of anything in the semifinals matchup for the Michigan Panthers. So I don't know if we really want to consider him there at all. Let's see here. Riley Moore for DC in last week's game didn't have any opportunities. In fact, hasn't really seen any opportunities in a couple of weeks now. So I don't know how you can feel good about him in a low-risk lineup. Ben Bresnahan is inactive. Now we finally get above 2,000 to the guys that I think are somewhat playable at this juncture. Devin Ross ran 14 routes last week for the Michigan Panthers. He was basically splitting that secondary outside wide receiver role with Jalen Moore. Jalen Moore had been dominating those opportunities, but specifically last week, it was a 50-50 split with Devin Ross, $2,400. I do think Devin Ross kind of interesting at makes Devin Ross kind of interesting here. Javon Antonio, inactive, not an option. Jaden Mickens, he's your backup slot wide receiver for the DC Defenders. He ran 12 routes last week versus 27 for Chris Rowland, who did lead the Defenders in routes run in that playoff game. So you're looking at 40 to 50% of snaps and routes played by Jaden Mickens, with maybe an opportunity for 2 to 3, maybe a handful more targets there at $3,000. We have Cole Hikatini, the number 1 tight end in Michigan's offense, heavily involved in a must-win playoff game against Michigan. Heavily involved in a must-win playoff game last week against Birmingham. I think this is where we start to look at where the field is going to go here. $3,200. We have 36 left. I do think the field is probably going to just flock to playing 4 Michigan players here, getting Jalen Moore in here. And I don't really love this for low risk because you don't have the high upside pass catchers in here with Bryce Perkins that I would want to have. But we don't really have access to a good value play that makes getting a defense or a kicker in here viable for us. So if we take the favored defense, which is the Panthers side, we got $1,800 left. If we drop down to BT Potter, their kicker, we have $2,200 left. And we'd be forced to play one of these cheap guys that I mentioned doesn't really have a tremendous amount of upside here this week. So maybe we can take the favored running back, put him in our captain. We can take Bryce Perkins, put him down in flex. And now we have a little bit more to play with. It's just not a great low-risk slate, guys, is really what I'm driving at here on DraftKings. It's more well-designed for us to consider playing tournament lineups, high-risk contests, and really shooting to hit the top of the leaderboards here instead of turning $10 into $18 in double-ups and 50-50s and whatnot. So that's kind of where I'm at this week. I do think I would prefer to play the high-risk contests and have a little bit of fun with it. Now, what we know about high-risk contests historically is that the wide receiver is the best or is the most frequent position to appear in winning lineups in the captain spot in DraftKings football showdown contests. So let's talk about wide receiver opportunities. And I'll go team by team here. We'll start with Michigan, the favored side here in a 50.5 point total game. Malik Turner is the primary wide receiver weapon for Bryce Perkins in this offense. He runs the vast majority of his routes out of slot positions. And when Bryce Perkins has been under center, we've actually seen the targets concentrate on Turner a little bit more than when he is not under center. So Malik Turner last week obviously had the big 76-yard touchdown as a little bit of an outlier. He's had a low average depth of target this season. We go to the full season data here that I have recapped, and shout out to PFF with all of their UFL tracking that they gave us all season long. When we look at the Michigan Panthers, Malik Turner, 8.5-yard average depth of target this year, had 65 targets, which was good for about 22% of team targets on the year for Michigan. By far the most high floor option to consider for the Panthers here at wide receiver. Do not mind using him in the captain position. If we are going to use an expensive wide receiver as our captain, before we go further, it would make sense to not use another receiver from that team unless they're a mispriced value. That's a general showdown rule, and I do think it applies to this game, because the thinking there is that this wide receiver, if it is Malik Turner or somebody else that I'm about to discuss here, they soak up all of the scoring in this game, and there isn't much to go around. So like, it wouldn't make sense, for example, to play Malik Turner at captain and then get Siaosi Mariner in your lineup at flex, because we're playing for an outcome where Malik Turner does so well in the football game that in fantasy football land, it basically leaves you no other option at wide receiver for Michigan to have a great day here. Hope that makes sense. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments of the video, and we'll do our best to respond before kickoff on Saturday night. Now, on the other side of high upside, high floor wide receiver opportunities for Michigan, this is your other wide receiver. Mariner led the UFL in receiving yards this season. He also led Michigan in air yards this season, just edged out Malik Turner with 14 fewer targets, including the playoff game. He's had 51 targets this season, 552 receiving yards, just one receiving touchdown. You could definitely, if you're going to run an air yard regression model, make the case that he has actually underperformed his opportunities for Michigan in this offense. Had just 4 targets last week versus the 7 that Turner had, which means I think people will be kind of off of Mariner here. I don't think this is going to be a very popular play. I think that makes him a really great captain option at receiver for the Panthers here. There isn't really any other pass catcher that I feel good about having high enough volume to be a viable captain play. I think if I was going to really galaxy brain it here, I might consider Cole Hicatini as the primary tight end, seeing a high volume of targets in recent weeks, but I don't really trust that in there. The ceiling hasn't been more than 15 fantasy points. I don't know if that's going to get us there this week, although it certainly would be an interesting salary-driven play here. Mentioned a little earlier when discussing the low-risk plays, Jalen Moore has been splitting opportunities with Devin Ross. The other receiver that we have to consider is Samson Nakua. Doesn't really play a full complement of snaps, but he is another outside boundary wide receiver in this offense for Michigan. Okay. The DC defenders. This is a lot more exciting, I think, when we talk about captain options at receiver. Here's something that just is a very superficial set of analysis, but I think will have a real role. You see that Ty Scott is listed as being on IR. Players are going to see this on DraftKings, and they will not put him in their lineups. I know it sounds like it's way too simple to put it that way, but that is definitely a dynamic that's going to take place here. Go back to last week. I spent an obnoxious amount of time talking about Ty Scott's impact on the conference championship slate. He ended up being inactive for that game, so a lot of that was irrelevant, but that analysis does apply to the championship game here. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, he had the best weighted opportunity role for a wide receiver in the entire UFL. He was integral to the DC offense staying on schedule and accomplishing what they wanted in the most productive offense in the league this season, and I do think Scott will get back to a very meaningful role here and be a player that is not necessarily going to be considered whatsoever. His price is kind of a little gross because he's priced right around Cornell Powell, Chris Rowland, and I just think the field's not really going to be sure how to handle this situation here in their lineups. But I do think he's viable as a captain option at receiver. DC has the highest average depth of target as an offense this season. They throw it 10.3 yards down the field on average, so that does mean I think we have multiple wide receiver opportunities available with DC. If we're going to use one of their starting wide receivers at captain, I do think there's paths to the secondary, cheaper backup wide receivers being in a winning lineup here this weekend. I think it's more likely we see the Michigan values get flex as far as ownership plays are concerned this week, but that's just something to consider as far as opportunities. You know, a low volume of opportunities for a Seth Williams, a Jaden Mickens. They definitely have paths to being in the optimal lineup this week. Other than Ty Scott, let's look at the recent opportunities. Chris Rowland is your slot receiver here. going to see a high volume of targets. I think he's definitely viable at the captain position. Cornell Powell led the UFL in receiving touchdowns this year. 13.8 yard average depth of target. Led the league in air yards this year. Definitely a great captain play who has been healthy. So unlike Ty Scott, there's really no playing time concern here. Even when Ty Scott was active in the first 3 weeks of the season, Cornell Powell was playing just as much outside of the numbers as a boundary wide receiver running routes deep downfield, and he was underperforming his opportunities. So I think he's a great captain option. Braylon Sanders is listed as the starter ahead of Ty Scott. At the beginning of the season, Braylon Sanders was inactive for DC because Ty Scott was playing. So unless it's truly health-driven, I just don't really see a path to Braylon Sanders playing in more meaningful spots on the field than Ty Scott this week. But you could consider him a captain option as well because he's listed as a starter here in DC's offense. The value plays are a little bit more interesting here. Seth Williams has performed very well the last 3 weeks of the season for DC, a late addition to their roster. They seem to like what they have with him there. We have Jaden Mickens, backup slot receiver to Chris Relland. I think he's my favorite backup wide receiver at cost here for DC. If I were to power rank where I think we should go for captain plays at receiver for DC, Cornell Powell is going to be my favorite option. Ty Scott is going to be right behind him. And then Chris Rowland is going to be third in the pecking order for me for players that I'm considering at captain. Once again, wide receivers most frequently in the winning lineup at the captain position on DraftKings in single game showdown contests, especially in high scoring games. And that is what we're anticipating here at a 50.5 point total. You can absolutely obviously play quarterbacks at captain in showdown in high risk and low risk. Just understand the ownership is going to be a lot higher. Ta'amu doesn't rush as much as Bryce Perkins, so I would consider a rule where if we're playing Ta'amu at captain, that you roster at least 2 pass catchers at the flex positions, and the pricing definitely allows for you to do that here. If you have a running back at captain, so if we have Deion Jackson having a big game for DC, if we have Toa Taua having a repeat big game for the Michigan Panthers, then just try to think about how that impacts every other player in the game from a fantasy scoring standpoint, especially at their anticipated salaries. We're probably going to see low ownership on backup running backs, and these guys are definitely capable of falling into the end zone and scoring a decent amount of fantasy points. That means when we look at Abram Smith at $6,800, got a little bit of run and a blowout for DC last week. When we look at Nate McCrary for Michigan, they probably have a little bit more upside from a scoring standpoint than their ownership will reflect in high risk this week, because they always can fall into the end zone and score 6-7 points that way at a minimum, right? So good high risk plays, not good low risk plays here at backup running back. My favorite way to play this slate, I have free projections available to our Discord subscribers available in the Occupy Fantasy Discord. If you're not yet a member, you can join the Discord through a link in the description of the video. I am going to be probably going with Cornell Powell at captain. That's how I prefer to play this slate. That means I want to get Jordan Ta'amu in my lineup. Definitely feel like this is a 2 quarterback lineup slate. High total game, the way these offenses are run. Definitely want to get those guys in there. 59.66 per player remaining. When we look at the best value play that's going to be available on the board, it's definitely going to be Cole Hikatini guys with Bryce Perkins. 73.50 per player remaining to finish off a lineup here. There's a lot of different ways that we can play this slate, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the UFL season wrap up. This is going to be an exciting game, guys. So I'm looking forward to seeing who actually takes home the crown here. And I'm just going to enjoy it and soak this all in. One final meaningful football game until we get into the NFL schedule at the beginning of September. Thanks for following the spring football content all season long, guys. I've appreciated your engagement with these videos, and we'll be back to talk to you guys soon.